Scary stories have been an integral part of mankind's creative expression since the days of oral storytelling. Myths, urban legends, scary stories told in the dark. All of these aim at capturing the essence of our collective fears and darkest nightmares. The horror short stories capitalized on these fears, remaining a lucrative market for hundreds of years. With the advent of the internet, particularly message boards and story-sharing websites, this genre of short story has hit the data streams. The horror short story has evolved and morphed in this new environment, spawning a new subgenre known as the creepypasta. In today's internet climate, the creepypasta is typically met with scorn and ridicule, considered low-quality and low-effort stories rehashing old tropes in order to reach a younger, uninitiated reader base. However, these types of stories did not have the widespread infamy as they do today. In order to best understand how this subgenre has evolved over time, we must first understand how this subgenre developed. Enter the Internet Forum. Forums and digital bulletin boards have been around since the 1970s and used in primarily governmental affairs. However, once the internet became public use, these forums transitioned into public spaces for discussions, Q&As, and the sharing of information. Spaces such as The Well, The Straight Dope, Something Awful, and many more would gain recognition and active members as the internet began to grow, spread, and evolve. It is in these early forums, websites, and resources that the modern internet horror story began to emerge. In these spaces, users would post their concepts, rough drafts, and even full-length horror short stories for all to see. In her 2014 article, Jessica Roy argues that what is now referred to as a creepypasta emerged in the 1990s through the passage of chain emails, text messages, and viral stories. These stories typically played on the fear of the reader, prompting the spreading of the message, lest some horrible fate befall the user. In these early days of the internet, new urban legends began to sprout, taking on the qualities and characteristics of modern creepypastas still read today. In this era, it becomes difficult to discern between urban legend and creepypasta, with some overlapping now and again, and even some modern definitions of creepypasta referring to them as modern folklore and urban legends. This era saw the rise of such urban legends as the Polybius Arcade Machine, the Bunny Man, and so many more. It is also difficult to verify much of creepypasta history due to the anonymous and chain email nature of the subgenre's earliest years. It wasn't until 2001 that one of the first considered true creepypastas was born. A short story known as Ted the Caver made its digital rounds in early 2001. An Angelfire website, a service launched in 1996 as an easy website creating tool, ran in rudimentary HTML. The website itself greets the user with salmon-colored text reading, "Welcome to the page of Ted, updated 19th of May, 01, with click here and pose in a grainy image of stalactite." The website dives into the story of Ted the Caver as they read from the journal of recent expeditions. The narrative takes place over 9 ensuing entries, featuring photographs and illustrations. In this story, Ted and B document their attempts at widening an entrance to an unexplored cave system. Strange sounds are heard as the pair work on excavating this area, specifically the sounds of rocks scraping against one another, the eerie sound of wind whistling, a deep rumbling, and at one point, a horrifying scream coming from within the cave. Ted and B grow to be more obsessed with the cave, desperately wanting to solve its secrets. As the story progresses, several supernatural events take place once Ted gains entrance into the unexplored system. The eerie feeling of being watched, the sounds of rock sliding, and the unmistakable presence of another living entity. Despite all the warning signs, all of the evidence to push Ted and B away, the pair continue in their obsessions until Ted's final entry. Although the story is now told through YouTube videos and online news and blog articles, the previous methods of spreading Ted the Caver was through word of mouth, forum and bulletin board posts, and chain emails. This story, once delivered in a new and exciting format, likely inspired by the viral marketing campaign of the Blair Witch Project, brought many internet browsers at the time to the website. Romano of the Daily Dot notes that Ted's blogging style set a precedent that countless followers in creepypasta lore would emulate. The creepy setting enhanced by a supernatural entity, an obsessed narrator who continues to return to the scene despite the danger, blogging all the way, and a cliffhanger, ambiguous ending that implies said danger is still out there. Adding on to Romano's statement, the story also set the precedent for telling stories in a first-person narrative, going so far as to blur the lines between fiction and reality, an element that has come to be integral to the subgenre. The more original and stylized the story could be, the more convincing and grounded the story can be, the more the author can bring the reader into the story, and the more the story can inspire a deep and visceral reaction from the reader, the more popular and well-known the story would become. Many would see this young, highly stylized, for the time, method of storytelling and would begin to cash in on the emerging subgenre, the internet horror story. Beginning in 2004 and lasting until 2006, another horror story would make an appearance on the internet. One that once again brought new life and methods to this emerging genre of internet storytelling. Written by 𝙀𝙁, this story, known as the Dionaea House, would incorporate and span several mediums and posts and one grand, overarching narrative. This may sound familiar, as this type of storytelling would evolve and come to be more popularly known as alternate reality games, simplified to ARGs, and unfiction. But, at this point, this genre of storytelling is still young, underdeveloped, and underutilized. This is the internet climate at the time of the Dionaea House. As mentioned, the story spans several mediums, broken up into 4 distinct chapters, allowing a wider audience to catch glimpses of the story as it unfolded. 𝙀𝙁's story came to following as it progressed, ensnaring new readers with each post, pulling them down into the rabbit hole of the narrative. Unfortunately, as of 2022, all posts regarding the story have since been deleted, and the website domain is no longer registered. Thankfully, the Wayback Machine has archived the entries, allowing a peek into the famous story. The story itself follows 2 friends, Mark and Ehrlich, as they investigate the house in which a former childhood friend Drew had house sat for 2 weeks a while back. The reason for this, Drew had come out changed, leading up to him shooting up a diner. What follows is a series of correspondence between Mark and Ehrlich as they discuss their investigation. Mark does some digging and discovers that Drew's last words were, "The door is open." After a few more emails, Mark decides to investigate and flies out to the area of the house in question. Mark begins doing research, with Ehrlich posting text messages and emails he received from him. Mark eventually decides to explore the property, texting Ehrlich cryptic messages such as, "Ears ringing again, I don't know what to do, how is it the same?" before heading inside the house and disappearing. The ensuing posts are from Eric's perspective, as he does his best to solve the mystery of the unnatural house. The story itself, spanning over the course of years through different mediums, helped to set the groundwork for new and emerging forms of storytelling. The series set a precedent for the modern horror short, focusing more on the immersive, overarching experience rather than a single posted story. The use of different mediums, and the spreading of the narrative over time, also laid the groundwork for the emerging genres of alternate reality games and unfiction. The Dionaea House is reflected on and considered a landmark in online horror storytelling, setting many firsts and setting the precedent for larger and longer multimedia narrative formats. While these larger, more attention-grabbing works of fiction, such as Ted the Caver and Dionaea House, were being published in their own domains, shorter, anonymous reads were being posted to websites such as 4chan. These brief stories, oftentimes posted anonymously, follow the more standard formula for the modern creepypasta: short, digestible horror bites, often told from a first-person perspective and posted with a veil of anonymity. Towards the end of the Dionaea House's run in 2006, the term copypasta also appeared on the forums of 4chan, referring to copy and paste text chains that would spread around the internet. Roughly a year later, in 2007, the term creepypasta emerged on the forums of 4chan. It would only grow from there. It wasn't until the launch of Creepypasta.com in March of 2008 that the term and subgenre began to fully develop. The exact definition for the label of creepypasta is in flux, with no one true definition being accepted across websites and communities. One source might say that creepypastas are internet horror stories that are often short and vague and passed around on forums and other sites to disturb and frighten readers. Or horror-related legends passed around the internet, with creepypasta becoming a catch-all term for any horror-related content on the internet. Regardless of exact definition, most resources agree that creepypasta is often a short and vague horror story passed around the internet. But not always. It should be noted that the creepypasta, while oftentimes short and vague, denotes the aspect of virality, which would include more popular, longer pieces of fiction, both written and multimedia, under the umbrella term. However, I would like to draw a line here with alternate reality games. The Dionaea House is remembered as a creepypasta. However, it has also contributed to the then burgeoning genres of unfiction and ARGs, separate and autonomous from the creepypasta. Both ARGs and unfiction seek to blur the lines between fiction and reality to create a truly unique experience that fully engages and immerses the viewer in the unfolding story. While creepypastas can take a similar approach, the two mediums are vastly different, especially considering that not all ARGs and unfiction are horror-themed, which is a core principle for the creepypasta. So, while certain ARGs and unfiction will be mentioned within the video, they are simply instances of the genres overlapping. In these early years, the creepypasta was primarily dominated by anonymous forum websites such as 4chan, Reddit, and Creepypasta.com. The earliest version of Creepypasta.com operated on taking anonymously posted horror short stories and gathering them into one single space. Despite the website being fairly young, it generated quite a bit of traffic, averaging in the thousands weekly, with an active viewer base, registered users, and live forum. The website would be regularly updated with new submissions, including both new and old horror short stories. Given the more niche market and typically more adult viewer base, these stories maintained a decent degree of quality. While not always amazing, the short stories could still stand and function on their own as independent reads. These reads would take on any number of horror subgenres, dealing in content matters such as insanity, beings and entities, murders, rituals, the cosmic, and so much more. Primarily focused on quick reads, this early era of the creepypasta website further popularized many horror short stories, and in turn horror tropes read today. Stories such as The Grove, The Army of the Dead, Thump Thump Drag, The Red Wristband, and Sarah O'Bannon were popular reads on the website. All of these stories were fairly short, able to be read in under a minute most typically, sticking more closely to the copypasta format the creepypasta portmanteau evolved from. Short, simple stories that could be easily copied and pasted for further virality. These short stories also set in stone the repeated tropes seen today: unusual locations and sites, murders and deaths, beings and entities, and so much more. Around the same time, and over the next few months, other creepypasta and urban legend themed websites would begin to emerge. Websites such as creepypasta.net, creepypasta.org, Creepbox, and even the SCP Foundation Wiki went live. All of these acted as resources for the strange, the macabre, the surreal, and the unreal. Horror short stories, flash fiction, and entire universes spanning decades. These websites began to give the internet horror story more prominence. And on June 10th, 2009, the next phase of the creepypasta would begin. On June 10th, 2009, Eric Knudsen, known by Zealous online as Victor Surge, posted a series of images to the Something Awful forums to a photoshopping contest. This challenge prompted users to create paranormal images. Surge, running with this idea, crafted an image of a tall, slender, and faceless entity wearing a black suit. Images of a tall figure standing in the background of black and white photos with quotes underneath each. "We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comfort us at the same time." 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead. One of the two recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished, and for what is referred to as the Slender Man, deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later, actual photograph confiscated as evidence. 1986, photographer Mary Thomas, missing since June 13th, 1986. A backstory, motivations and methods, and exact style were never fully established, allowing other users to add onto the story and create their own mythos surrounding the elusive figure. Only 10 days later, on June 20th, 2009, the first entry into the web series Marble Hornets was posted to YouTube. The series followed a group of individuals but focused primarily on Jay Merrick. Jay spends part of the series uncovering what happened to his friend Alex Crayley while they were finishing a film called Marble Hornets, during which Alex's physical and mental state degraded to the point of canceling the project. During the series, Jay dives into a rabbit hole, learning of the mysterious operator, the Slender Man character, and its many acolytes. Overall, the series ran for around 5 years, spanning 3 distinct seasons, spawning spin-off channels, series, and a film before coming to a close. The ensuing popularity of Marble Hornets only added to the virality of the Slender Man and the Slender Man mythos. Slender Man also brought attention back to the still young subgenre of the creepypasta. As more and more people began to read into the Slender Man mythos, more and more people began to read through the creepypasta website, and more writers and content creators began to contribute to this emerging market. Along with the rise of the Slender Man, other infamous creepypasta would begin to emerge during this period as well. Jeff the Killer, for example, originated most likely in 2008 on 4chan message boards, setting the stage for the serial killer category. His Suicide Mouse video was posted to YouTube in late 2009, setting the stage for the Lost Episodes subgenre. The Been Drowned ARG began in 2010, with the first video being uploaded to YouTube on September 7th of that year, which, again, set the stage for the video game creepypasta. These intervening years also saw other creepypastas making their way into YouTube. Oftentimes, YouTubers would begin doing narrations of select creepypasta stories, giving audiences a carefully curated selection of higher quality stories. The platform also saw the introduction of more multimedia stories, with creepypastas such as Suicide Mouse, Squid vs. Suicide, and even video game footage to go along with uploaded creepypastas. Videos discussing the backgrounds of certain creepypastas, or even just videos sharing certain images and videos began to circulate, such as videos detailing smiledog.jpg. But it was not until the opening of the Creepypasta Wiki and the r/NoSleep subreddit did the creepypasta truly gain the widespread recognition as it does today. Let's begin with r/NoSleep. Created on March 24, 2010, NoSleep became a subreddit for Redditors to share their scary personal stories. In the subreddit, users would often share their own horror or paranormal-related experiences, oftentimes mixing fact and fiction, or creating entire works of fiction altogether. With the site's ability to up and downvote posts, the open nature of the subreddit allowed for anyone to post, but would counterbalance with the ability to downvote poorly written or cliched works of fiction. This would allow more original works of fiction or more true stories to be filtered to the top. NoSleep would have a lasting impact on the creepypasta and horror YouTube scene, with many YouTubers beginning to pull from NoSleep to narrate and spread around the internet, adding to a story's virality. This phenomenon became so widespread, there are now disclaimers on the subreddit warning content creators and art thieves from narrating or taking stories without the express consent of the original poster. Failure to do so may result in a DMCA claim on the video. With this in mind, NoSleep still makes an impact on today's horror community and is still churning out new content, both fiction and non-fiction, for horror enthusiasts to enjoy. Whether or not these stories could be considered creepypastas is up for debate. However, the subreddit's lasting impact on the online horror community cannot be glossed over. On the flip side of r/NoSleep, the Creepypasta Wiki has had a fairly different run. Created sometime in 2010, the Creepypasta Wiki became another resource for permanently archiving many of these anonymously posted horror short stories. The format of the website is simple and easy to use. Users are greeted with a standard wiki/fandom landing homepage with the categories at the top, additional information on the right-hand side, and a pasta of the month listed on the homepage. Users could sort their stories by their genre, look at suggested readings, read popular news stories, pick a random story, or even browse through the previous pastas of the month. Given the format of a wiki or fandom, anyone was and is capable of creating an account to contribute to the website, most typically with moderators helping to keep the service running smoothly. However, it is this ability for any user to join and submit that led to an entirely new issue within the community: an influx of poorly written stories. A good chunk of early creepypastas, while not expertly written and oftentimes not quite groundbreaking, still maintained a degree of quality, especially given the selective nature of certain websites, such as creepypasta.com. However, the wiki, allowing anyone to create a page, allowed for just about anyone to hop onto the wiki and create a story. This in itself led to a remarkable drop in quality, with many over-the-top, cliched, trope-riddled stories making their way into the wiki. This period of creepypasta truly borrowed from the copypasta formula, taking bits and pieces of whichever story the writer saw fit and smashed them together into new works of fiction that lacked originality, suspense, and quality. These stories would become so prominent, so widespread, that YouTubers and content creators began making videos on the topics. While it is easy to attack these stories, it should also be noted that oftentimes these creepypastas were written by many younger users of the websites, typically middle school aged to young high schoolers, or even individuals with little writing experience in the past. And while the website did allow for these younger creators to flex their writing muscles, the sheer volume of the works led to a decline in the overall quality of the creepypasta over the next 4 years. On November 12, 2010, the New York Times would post the article, "Bored at Work? Try Creepypasta or Web Scares." This single act by the newspaper would bring national attention to the growing fad of the creepypasta. Suddenly, those who were not previously interested in horror or the subgenre were now reading these stories. Younger, more susceptible audience members became enthralled with the creepypasta, flocking to the websites, YouTube channels, and narrators to listen or read the next creepy story. Jessica Roy notes in her Times article that creepypasta hit peak popularity with the 2010 New York Times story by showcasing the emerging subgenre to the entire world. No longer a mere niche community, but now a community on the front page of the internet, with good and bad stories alike, now on full display. And while Roy states that the creepypasta hit its peak in 2010, for adults and older members of the community possibly, but for the younger members just joining, it was only just the beginning. Enter Slender, the 8 Pages. What truly catapulted creepypasta into the limelight and into the average person's digital lexicon was an indie game going with the name Slender, the 8 Pages. The video game, running in Unity engine with the basic premise of collecting 8 pages while avoiding the eponymous Slender Man, released on June 26, 2012 at the absolute height of the Slender Man craze on YouTube. The then major horror-centric YouTubers, such as PewDiePie, Markiplier, and so many more, covered the game with hyped enthusiasm, over-the-top reactions, and full endorsement of the game. Overnight, the Slender Man was once again back on the front page of YouTube, and the front page of the internet for all to see. The 8 Pages also helped to set the precedent of transforming creepypastas into video games. Games that could be played on any number of platforms to further spread the popularity of the creepypastas. Previously released modded games, such as the Pokemon Lost Silver and the Pokemon Curse Black mods, would also gain notoriety and popularity during this trend as well. 5 games surrounding the Luna game creepypasta were created in 2011. The Midnight Game, based upon the short story of the same name. The Sonic.exe game. And a sequel to the 8 Pages, entitled Slender, the Arrival, released in 2013. Over the course of the next few years, several more games would be released, pulling inspiration from popular creepypastas of the time. These creepypasta video games would regularly gain traction on YouTube and other platforms. Creepypasta fans and viewers alike would flock to the videos to watch their favorite YouTuber play a horror-themed game based upon whichever creepypasta was popular at the time. This trend further entrenched the previous fanbase sent to the community and allowed for new creepypasta enthusiasts to join as well. However, it is around this time that the creepypasta community had to address its major problem. As stated earlier in the video, as young readers began to fill the creepypasta wiki and websites, a trend of poorly written and unoriginal stories began to flood the subgenre between 2010 and 2014, only exacerbated by the 8 pages in 2012. Hyper-realistic gore, lost episodes, video game creepypastas, story and entity clones, and other over-the-top tropes began to define the subgenre by this point. Instead of being known for anonymous horror short stories capable of being spread around quite easily, the subgenre quickly became known for its unoriginality and poor quality. For every Slender Man, several clones and spin-offs would follow. For every Jeff the Killer, a dozen more killer clones would pop up. For every Ben Drowned or Lost Silver, many more video game creepypastas would follow. For every Suicide Mouse, another series of lost episodes would follow. And in these clones, spin-offs, and remixes, the community came to one valid consensus. The subgenre had become creatively bankrupt. It's in this bankruptcy that creepypasta came to be slang to refer to works of low-quality horror lacking in originality. Simply put, it referred to bad horror stories. While new and original stories were still being created, their impact became vastly overshadowed by the internet's growing perception of the creepypasta as simply poorly written, overly cliché horror stories on the internet. The growing number of young teens and inexperienced authors in the community did not help to dispel this perception. The fan art, the fanfiction, the self-insert creepypastas, and the over-the-top YouTube videos only worked to attract a younger, more zealous fanbase wanting their fill of the latest horror fad. The younger members' obsession with figures such as Jeff the Killer, Slender Man, and other figures only furthered outsiders' perception of the community as one full of tropes, clichés, and strange idolizing of fictitious murderers, truly living up to the copy portion of copypasta that creepypasta evolved from. The last 4 years, from 2010 to 2014, effectively saw an increase in popularity and a noticeable decrease in overall quality. And it would be 2 years after the release of the 8 pages, nearly 4 years after it made headlines in the New York Times, that the creepypasta would once again gain national attention, in all the wrong ways.
Where did this happen at?
In some trees.
How'd you guys end up by the trees?
Because we were going to look at, like, plants and stuff.
How far off the road was it?
Not very. And then we stabbed her.
This subgenre enjoyed a short-lived few-year stint, dominating much of the horror content posted to YouTube and to the internet altogether. This, however, came to a screeching halt on May 31st, 2014. 2 young girls from Wisconsin lured a friend out into the woods and stabbed her repeatedly. Their reasoning? To appease the Slender Man. Thankfully, the victim survived the ordeal, flagging down a cyclist who called the police. The incident sparked outrage across the country, as the creepypasta received both the spotlight and the scrutiny that came along with it. It was this social pushback to this idea of creepypasta that the term came to include anything horror-related on the internet, anything that could remotely negatively influence impressionable youths in the public's eyes. Ehrlich, creator of the Slender Man, issued a formal apology stating that, "I am deeply saddened about the tragedy in Wisconsin, and my heart goes out to the families of those affected by this terrible act." Slush Train, a moderator for the Creepypasta Wiki, also voiced their concern and defended the website. He posted, "We are a literature website, not a crazy satanic cult," and that parents need to discuss to their children the powerful influence the internet could have on them, and help them understand and differentiate fantasy and reality. Dr. Shira Chess, an assistant professor in the Department of Telecommunications at the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communications, also commented on the matter, stating that, "Places where adults and children are creating fiction are important, they're important for writers. It gives them a space to experiment with their voice and become good writers. And it gives readers a chance to understand a lot of different kinds of stories that we need to tell ourselves about the world. Despite these claims and statements, the damage had already been done. The national image of the creepypasta and its surrounding community had been tainted by this tragedy, and the smudge has been difficult to erase, with the Wiki updating their user conduct page to include, "It is against site policy to post any illegal or unauthorized content or use for any illegal or unauthorized purposes that violate any laws in your jurisdiction, to further discourage any future repeat incidents and further distance themselves from the tainted image." That same year, and less than a month later, on June 20th, 2014, the Marble Hornets Slender Man horror series came to a close, marking an end to the character and its legacy. A year prior, in February of 2013, Variety had announced that Marble Hornets Associates would be producing a film set within the same universe as the series, but would not be a direct continuation or follow the same set of characters. Released to DVD in April of 2015, Always Watching, a Marble Hornets story, received mostly negative reviews. The clear disinterest in the character, mixed with a script that was considered inferior to the web series, led to the film floundering. That same year, Machinima announced they would be producing a live-action web series helmed by Clive Barker that would focus on select creepypastas, namely Slender Man and the Ben Drowned series. This too struggled to find its feet, and ultimately never saw the light of day with the closing of Machinima. In March of 2016, HBO released a documentary entitled Beware the Slender Man. This documentary covered the background and motivations behind the aforementioned stabbing, containing interviews with those involved. While the film holds an 85% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience score fares worse, sitting at 52% in 2022. On the flip side, in true Hollywood fashion to show up late to a popular internet craze, Sony Pictures greenlit a feature-length Slender Man film in May of 2016, and in the fall of the same year, the Sci-Fi Channel aired the first season of their new show, Channel Zero, helmed by Nick and Tosca. Channel Zero, running from 2016 to 2018 and lasting 4 6-episode seasons, acted as an anthology series, with each season being based upon a different creepypasta or horror short story. The first season, Candle Cove, featuring Paul Schneider and Fiona Shaw, saw the show adapt Chris Straub's Candle Cove horror short story. Candle Cove would be followed by The No End House, Butcher's Block, very loosely based on Search and Rescue Woods, a series posted to Reddit, and ending with The Dream Door prior to its cancellation. Despite the series being lovingly crafted by Nick and Tosca and their production team, the series never broke 800,000 viewers per episode, losing viewers with each season, and by the end of its run and cancellation, had its least viewed episode at only 173,000 viewers. This in itself showed the public's perception and fatigue with the creepypasta. The public was moving on to bigger and better things. The horror film market once again found its footing and had exploded once again. Films tackling the paranormal, particularly the Conjuring franchise, as well as other horror-themed shows such as American Horror Story and Stranger Things, brought much of the public's attention back to the mainstream horror, rather than amateur and anonymous horror stories posted online. In this push for mainstream horror, the Slender Man film released on August 10th, 2018. The film itself saw a tumultuous production. The families involved in the Slender Man stabbing protested the film's release, stating, "It's popularizing a tragedy is what it's doing." I'm not surprised, but in my opinion, it's extremely distasteful. Needless to say, critical reception of the film followed a similar vein. The film holds an 8% among critics and a 7% among 25,000 audience ratings. David Ehrlich of IndieWire summed up critic and audience reactions in his review: "A tasteless and inevitably undercooked serving of the internet's stalest creepypasta." With the waning interest in and cancellation of Channel Zero and Sci-Fi, and the box office bomb that was Slender Man, it's safe to say that the creepypasta craze had come to a silent conclusion. Since 2018, the creepypasta community has gone through some improvements and transformations. A lot of the younger writers that filled the community's ranks back in 2012 have grown up and become more senior members of the community. And with the limelight away for the subgenre for a time, the community has shrunk back down to better match its original 2008 size. A smaller, niche community of individuals dedicated to posting and sharing pieces of horror literature. while other websites have closed over the years. Creepypasta.com, the Creepypasta Wiki, r/NoSleep, and many more remain active. Creepypasta.com still accepts submissions from writers, but is pretty selective when it comes to posting stories, acting as more of a publication rather than an archive by this point. On the flip side, the Creepypasta Wiki is still open to the public, albeit more quality conscious in 2022. The Community tab features a writer's workshop for those interested in honing their craft, writing advice blogs, and authors' rights pages. The site rules also receive some much-needed updates. The Wiki has strict quality standards that users must adhere to. Basic spell and grammar checks, good storytelling, and originality are emphasized. The site has blacklisted spin-offs, lost episodes, Jeff the Killer-inspired characters, theory stories, SCP pages, haunted video games, and recently, Five Nights at Freddy's, to prevent the same low-quality, copy-paste spin-off fanfiction stories from once again filling the site. As for r/NoSleep, the subreddit is still going strong. Users are continuing to actively post and share stories to the subreddit, with the up and downvote feature helping to filter through the more popular and interesting reads. Over the last several years, YouTubers have taken to doing read-aloud narrations of many NoSleep stories, using the subreddit, among others, to help filter through high-quality stories to share. However, that isn't to say the subreddit hasn't had its issues. Some YouTubers, especially those who use text-to-speech synthesizers, have received flack for not asking permission before monetizing someone else's story. On the note of YouTubers, a fairly strong community has emerged from the early years of reading creepypastas aloud. 𝙀𝙬𝙚𝙆, Lazy Masquerade, and many more have created a niche community here on YouTube, aimed at narrating horror short stories, both found online and fan-submitted. These individuals have helped to keep the genre of the internet horror short story alive and well on the platform. This has also given rise to other prominent YouTubers who cover ARGs and unfiction, such as Nexpo and Nightmind, which has allowed the unfiction community to gain traction in the void where early creepypastas once filled. The creepypasta has evolved, changed, and reverted over the last 15 or so years of its existence. The genre came about in the forums, bulletin boards, and chat rooms of the 1990s, slowly gaining prominence in the mid-2000s, with the stories such as Ted the Caver and the Dionaea House. The term creepypasta was coined. Within the next year, Creepypasta.com launched and began archiving many of the anonymous horror short stories posted to 4chan, as well as accepting new creepypastas to the vault. The subgenre remained fairly simple and straightforward, being known for its short and ambiguous nature, easily shared among family, friends, and co-workers. By the 2010s, a few of the more staple creepypastas, such as Jeff the Killer, Slender Man, and Been Drowned, gained prominence, and a New York Times article brought more attention to the growing community and subgenre. By 2012, ARGs, horror series, associated creepypastas, a full creepypasta wiki, and a video game centered around the then popular Slender Man creepypasta filled the internet. Popularity soared higher than before, as notable YouTubers and content creators brought attention to the now famous subgenre. The creepypasta saw a good 4 to 5 years of consistent popularity and notoriety, though marked by a decline in overall quality due to a young reader and contributor base and an influx of low-quality writings. By 2014, the subgenre once again gained national attention in the Wisconsin Slender Man stabbing, grinding the subgenre to a halt in the public's eye. Perception was already waning, with reader fatigue and an overzealous younger fanbase, leading to the general public and average internet user to push away from the subgenre. In true Hollywood fashion, showing up late to the party, film and production companies tried to capitalize on the once hyped style of storytelling, hoping to rekindle some of the former glory. Unfortunately, many of these ventures fell flat time and time again, with the likes of Channel Zero and the Slender Man feature film released in 2016 and 2018 respectively. These failures in themselves put the final nail in the coffin for the once prosperous and sprawling community. In today's internet climate, the subgenre and its surrounding community has mostly reverted back to what it was to start with, a niche community dealing in short, digestible horror short stories. And there it remains to this day, users sharing internet myths and horror stories in forums and through messages, in videos and in photos, in shares and posts to social media, further spreading the virality of these internet urban legends.